Blackwood Hollow was a town draped in secrecy. For decades, stories swirled around its misty streets about a cursed house at the end of Ashen Alley. It was a place spoken of in whispers, a house that seemed to breathe malevolence. Some said it was alive, others that it was a doorway to another world. Lucas had heard all the stories. Growing up in Blackwood Hollow, he'd listened to his grandmother recount tales of disappearances, strange happenings, and shadowy figures tied to the house. Yet, like most people his age, he dismissed them as baseless folklore. But that all changed on a cold autumn evening when Lucas first heard the whispers. Walking home from his part-time job at the bookstore, he noticed how quiet the streets were. The usual chatter of neighbors, the distant hum of cars, it was all absent, replaced by an unnatural stillness. As he passed Ashen Alley, a faint sound stopped him in his tracks. Lucas. The voice was soft, barely audible, but unmistakably real. He turned sharply, scanning the dark alley. The house stood there like a shadow against the night, its silhouette menacing. He tried to shake it off, convincing himself it was just his imagination, and hurried home. That night, the dreams began. He found himself walking through the house, its walls closing in around him. Shadows moved like living creatures, and the whispers grew louder, suffocating him. He woke drenched in sweat, the voice still echoing in his ears. The next day, he tried to forget about it, but the whispers persisted, following him everywhere he went. By evening, he couldn't take it anymore. Determined to confront whatever was haunting him, he grabbed a flashlight and made his way back to Ashen Alley. The house loomed before him, its broken windows like eyes staring into his soul. The air was colder here, heavy and oppressive. The front door was slightly ajar, as if waiting for him. With a deep breath, he stepped inside. The interior was frozen in time, like a snapshot from a long-forgotten era. Dust coated every surface, and cobwebs draped over the furniture. A grandfather clock stood in the corner, its hands unmoving. Lucas moved cautiously, his flashlight revealing details that sent shivers down his spine. Claw marks on the walls, a broken mirror with streaks that looked suspiciously like dried blood, and strange symbols etched into the wooden floor. The whispers grew louder, more distinct, seeming to come from every direction. He felt a cold breeze pass by him, though there were no open windows. Suddenly, a loud creak echoed from above. He froze, listening. Footsteps. Gathering his courage, he climbed the staircase, each step groaning under his weight. The upper floor was darker, the air heavier. Doors lined the hallway, all slightly ajar. He pushed the first one open and found a child's bedroom. The bed was neatly made, toys scattered across the floor, but the rocking chair in the corner swayed gently, as if someone had just left it. A faint giggle broke the silence, followed by the sound of a ball rolling across the floor. Lucas turned his flashlight toward the sound, but there was no one there. The giggle turned into a soft cry. He backed out of the room, his heart racing. Further down the hall, he found a study. The desk was cluttered with papers and old books, many of them covered in symbols he didn't recognize. One book lay open, its pages filled with sketches of shadowy figures and cryptic notes. A single phrase was scrawled repeatedly across the margin. "They are watching." A sudden crash from downstairs jolted him out of his thoughts. He spun around, his flashlight flickering. The shadows seemed to grow thicker, more alive. He ran back down the hallway, but the house felt different now, as if it were shifting around him. Reaching the staircase, he looked down and froze. Shadows pooled at the bottom of the stairs, writhing and taking on humanoid shapes. Their glowing eyes locked onto him, and the whispers turned into screams. Panicking, he ran in the opposite direction, bursting into a bedroom at the end of the hall. The room was dominated by a massive mirror that seemed to radiate cold. As he approached it, he noticed his reflection didn't move. Instead, it stared back at him with an expression of pure terror. The reflection's lips moved, though Lucas didn't speak. "Get out," it whispered. Before he could react, hands emerged from the mirror, grabbing at him. He stumbled backward, tripping over an old trunk. The hands receded, but the whispers continued, now filled with malice. Desperate to escape, Lucas ran back down the stairs, the shadows chasing him. The house groaned and creaked, as if alive, its walls closing in. He reached the front door, but it wouldn't budge. Behind him, the shadows advanced, their shapes growing more defined. He turned to face them, his flashlight flickering weakly. "What do you want?" he shouted. The shadows paused, their forms shifted. One step forward, its face eerily human but hollow, its eyes glowing faintly. It spoke in a voice layered with countless others. "Stay! Join us!" Lucas screamed, throwing his flashlight at the figure. The impact caused a brief flash of light, and he took the opportunity to run. The door suddenly swung open, and he stumbled outside, collapsing onto the cobblestone street. When he looked back, the house was gone. Only the faint outline of its foundation remained, shrouded in mist. The whispers were gone too, replaced by an eerie silence. Over the following weeks, Lucas tried to move on, but the experience had changed him. Shadows seemed to follow him, their shapes lingering longer than they should. He began hearing the whispers again, faint at first, then louder. One night, he woke to find himself standing at the edge of Ashen Alley, the house once again looming before him. It called to him, and this time, he couldn't resist. Lucas stood motionless at the edge of Ashen Alley, the frigid air biting at his skin. The house had returned, as if it had been waiting for him all along. The windows glowed faintly, casting an unnatural light onto the cobblestones. Without realizing it, his feet began to move forward, each step heavy and reluctant, as if unseen forces guided him. The door creaked open before he could touch it, revealing the same frozen interior as before. The air was thick, almost suffocating. The whispers greeted him, this time louder and more persistent, their tone pleading and sinister. "Lucas, you belong here." He tried to fight the compulsion to step inside, but it was futile. His flashlight flickered weakly, offering little comfort as he crossed the threshold. The door slammed shut behind him, plunging him into near darkness. The whispers intensified, now a cacophony of voices overlapping. The house had changed. The furniture was gone, replaced by towering bookshelves filled with ancient, decaying tomes. The claw marks on the walls had multiplied, and the symbols etched into the floor glowed faintly, pulsating like a heartbeat. As he moved further in, the house seemed to shift around him. Corridors stretched impossibly long, and doors appeared where there had been none before. He turned a corner and found himself in a room he hadn't seen during his first visit. It was circular, with walls lined with mirrors, each reflecting not just him, but shadowy figures lurking behind him. He spun around, but the room was empty. "Why me?" he whispered, his voice trembling. One of the mirrors cracked, its surface splintering into jagged shards. From its fractured depths, a figure emerged. A woman in a tattered dress, her face pale and hollow-eyed. She reached out to him, her voice a soft, mournful wail. "Help us." Before he could respond, the other mirrors shattered simultaneously, unleashing a swarm of shadows that filled the room. Lucas bolted through the nearest door, his heart pounding. He found himself in a narrow hallway, the floorboards groaning under his weight. At the end of the corridor, a faint light beckoned. He followed it, hoping for escape, but instead emerged into a cavernous chamber. At its center stood the massive mirror from his first visit, now surrounded by black candles whose flames burned an eerie green. The whispers reached a fever pitch, echoing off the walls. The shadows coalesced around the mirror, their forms writhing and incomplete. A deep voice, unlike any he had heard before, resonated through the chamber. "You returned, as we knew you would." Lucas felt his legs buckle, but he forced himself to stand. "What do you want from me?" he demanded, his voice cracking. The mirror's surface rippled like water, and a face emerged, a twisted, grotesque visage with glowing eyes that bore into him. "You were chosen, Lucas. The house has marked you. There is no escape." "No," Lucas shouted, backing away. "I don't belong here." The shadowy figures advanced, their movements synchronized as if controlled by a single mind. The whispers turned into mocking laughter, and the face in the mirror grinned, revealing rows of jagged teeth. Desperate, Lucas grabbed one of the candles and hurled it at the mirror. The flame extinguished midair, and the candle crumbled to ash before it could make contact. The face in the mirror roared, the sound vibrating through the chamber and shaking the walls. "Back to you." A voice, softer but clear, cut through the chaos. "The symbols, Lucas. The floor." He looked down and saw the glowing symbols pulsing in a pattern. Something clicked in his mind. His grandmother's stories about protective sigils, about breaking the house's hold. Without thinking, he dropped to his knees and began tracing over the symbols with his hands, disrupting the patterns. The shadows recoiled, not their forms flickering. The mirror's glow dimmed, and the face twisted in anger. "Stop!" it bellowed, but Lucas continued, his movements frantic. As he disrupted the final symbol, the entire house shuddered violently. The shadows screamed, their voices merging into a deafening wail. The mirror cracked, its surface splintering into countless shards. A blinding light filled the room, forcing Lucas to shield his eyes. When the light faded, he found himself outside, now lying on the cobblestones. The house was gone, replaced by an empty lot overgrown with weeds. The whispers were silent. Lucas stood, his body trembling. He looked around, half expecting the shadows to reappear, but the street was quiet. The oppressive weight that had followed him was lifted, replaced by a strange stillness. But deep down, he knew it wasn't over. The house might be gone, but its mark remained. As he walked away, he caught a glimpse of his reflection in a puddle. For a moment, it wasn't his face staring back at him. It was the twisted visage from the mirror, grinning, and then it was gone.